The date is etched into the very foundation of aviation history, a day when the improbable became the devastatingly real. March 27, 1977. The location is Tenerife, a Spanish island usually known for its tranquil beaches. But today, the atmosphere is thick, heavy, and already stained with the precursor of tragedy. It began not with a mechanical failure, but with chaos imported from another airport. A bomb threat at Las Palmas Airport had forced the diversion of several massive international flights, rerouting them to the tiny, under-equipped Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife. This small apron, built for propeller planes and light jets, was suddenly choked with titans, several Boeing 747s waiting bumper to bumper. Among them sat the KLM Flight 4805, a behemoth carrying 234 passengers and 14 crew, and Pan Am Flight 1736, carrying 380 passengers and 16 crew. The airport was unprepared for this deluge. Ground controllers were overwhelmed. The traffic flow was improvised and dangerous. And then, the fog rolled in. Not a light mist, but a thick, suffocating marine layer that seemed to possess a physical malice. Within minutes, visibility on the runway dropped to barely 300 meters. The world outside the cockpit glass became a gray, opaque wall. For the captain of the KLM jet, Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten, the situation was intolerable. Van Zanten was not just an experienced pilot. He was the KLM's chief training captain, a celebrated figure whose face appeared in the airline's advertisements. He was a professional to the bone, but he was also under immense pressure. Dutch labor laws mandated strict duty hour limits. If he did not take off soon, his crew would time out, forcing a costly delay that could last an entire day. Urgency, that silent killer of critical thinking, began to take root. The Los Rodeos Airport did not have ground radar, meaning the controllers could not visually track the aircraft movements on the taxiways or the runway in the fog. They relied solely on radio reports and visual confirmation, which the weather had now rendered impossible. The control tower instructed KLM 4805 to taxi down the main runway, turn into the taxiway, and wait at the end. Pan Am 1736 was trailing behind KLM, asked to use the same runway for taxi, but with a different instruction. Proceed down the runway and take the third exit, Charlie 4, to clear the way for KLM. This is where the chain of errors began to fuse into disaster. The Pan Am crew, Captain Victor Grubbs, First Officer Robert Bragg, and Flight Engineer George Warnes were immediately confused. They were in an unfamiliar airport, navigating a complex turn in zero visibility. They missed the first designated exit, Charlie 3, which required a sharp 135-degree turn. In the blinding fog, and unsure if Charlie 4 was even possible for the 747's massive wingspan, they proceeded slowly, cautiously. They were still on the main runway. Up ahead, KLM 4805 reached the very end of the runway, poised for takeoff. The tension in their cockpit was palpable. They needed clearance. Veldhuizen van Zanten applied the brakes. In the cabin behind him, the passengers were completely unaware that the largest passenger jet they had ever flown was sitting directly facing a looming disaster. In the tower, the air traffic controller, using non-standard phraseology that would later be scrutinized by the entire world, issued the route clearance to KLM. This clearance described the route the plane must fly after takeoff, but KLM misinterpreted it as the immediate clearance to take off. Van Zanten, his mind perhaps already focused on the tight schedule and the approaching deadline, confirmed the instruction. "We are now at takeoff." Crucially, the tower responded, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." Here, the perfect storm found its nexus. At the precise moment the tower transmitted the critical phrase, "Stand by for takeoff," the Pan Am crew, still crawling down the runway, transmitted their confusion. "And we are still taxiing down the runway, Pan Am 1736. The simultaneous transmissions caused a heterodyne effect. A high-pitched squeal obliterated the radio signal in the KLM cockpit. Captain Van Zanten and his co-pilot heard only the initial OK and the tail end of the transmission. They believed they were cleared. Co-pilot Moers, moments later, questioned the decision, asking if the Pan Am jet had cleared the runway. Van Zanten, with the supreme confidence of a chief pilot who believes the tower would never give him a takeoff clearance if another plane was on the tarmac, dismissed the concern. "Oh yes," he said, "it is cleared." Without authorization, without confirmation, the great Dutch jet began to accelerate. In the tower, the controller was horrified to see KLM accelerating down the runway. He shouted, "KLM 4805, report clear." The message was received with confusion by the KLM crew, who were now moving at a frightening speed. Meanwhile, on the runway ahead, the Pan Am crew was still searching for their exit. They were completely engulfed in the fog. The air was silent except for the low rumble of their own engines. Then, Pan Am flight engineer George Warnes looked out the window. Through the shifting gray veil, two impossibly bright landing lights appeared, growing larger with horrifying speed. "There he is!" Warnes screamed. "Look at him! He is heading for us!" Captain Grubbs slammed the throttles forward, desperately attempting to jerk the 747 onto the grass. A desperate, impossible attempt to escape the collision path. In the KLM cockpit, Van Zanten finally received the tower's frantic question about his clearance. It was too late. He looked up, and through the wall of fog he saw the monstrous shape of the Pan Am jet directly in his path. He pulled the nose up violently, attempting the impossible. But he had reached V1, the speed from which an abort is no longer possible. The KLM jet was airborne for a fraction of a second, its belly scraping over the Pan Am's cockpit and upper fuselage. The impact was not a glancing blow. It was a shearing, total annihilation. The KLM 747 tore the top third of the Pan Am jet clean off. It then smashed down violently onto the runway 150 meters further, skidding nearly a mile before erupting into a catastrophic fire that illuminated the dense fog in an eerie, blood-red glow. The silence that followed the explosion was perhaps the most chilling part of the entire ordeal. On board the KLM jet, every single soul, 248 people, perished instantly. On board the Pan Am jet, a miracle of sorts occurred within the horror. The impact was so high that some passengers in the lower deck and forward section survived the initial blow. But the destruction of the upper deck and the resulting fire proved overwhelming. The thick fog hindered rescue efforts terribly. Firefighters, confused by the overlapping wrecks and the density of the air, initially focused only on the burning wreck of the KLM aircraft, failing for crucial minutes to realize there were two 747s involved, one with survivors trapped inside. When the final tally was calculated, 583 people had lost their lives. It remains the single deadliest accident in the history of commercial aviation. The Tenerife Tragedy was a horrifying convergence of systemic failures, environmental dangers, and human psychological factors. It was a profound lesson in how easily pride, urgency, ambiguity, and poor communication can erase hundreds of lives in less than 30 seconds. The investigation led to sweeping and permanent changes in the global aviation industry. Standardized, mandatory communication phraseology was introduced, making phrases like takeoff position and cleared for takeoff distinct and non-interchangeable. English proficiency standards for all control tower staff and pilots were tightened. The concept of cockpit resource management, emphasizing mutual questioning and challenging authority when safety is in doubt, became paramount. Tenerife did not just change rules. It changed the fundamental culture of the cockpit, ensuring that such a perfect storm of disastrous assumptions and misinterpreted words would never again seal the fate of two planes on a single runway. It remains the day the world learned the terrifying cost of silence, when one small word, "stand by," was lost forever in the static.